Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, July 19th, and we will hear from NIMBY to not impossible, maybe, better yet. And for those of our friends that might not be directly related to planning, we know that NIMBY is not in my backyard because planners have a habit of having a lot of acronyms for things. So if you have any technical questions or issues, you can type those in the Q&A box. I'll do my best to help you through that. And if you have questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the Q&A box and I'll be watching them. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Today's host is APA Kansas. Thank you for joining us in our webcast series program and for hosting today's session. Coming up on your screen is some of our upcoming webinars for the month of August. I'm starting to book into November. I can't believe this. So you can register for these and all of our upcoming sessions at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. You can log your credits by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can search by title or event number, both of which can be found on our website, again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, and reminders of our weekly upcoming webinars. And head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. If you just type in Planning Webcast in the search field, we'll pop up along with our well over 500 session recordings, all available to you for free. So yes, we do record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel the following Monday. So on Monday, it'll pop up. So if you subscribe to our channel, you'll get notified when it's ready. So that's the end of my housekeeping items. Again, if you have any questions for our panelists, type them in the Q&A box. We'll get to those at the end. Don't raise your hand. Don't try to get sound or anything like that. Just type those questions in and we'll get to them. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Bonnie to kick off today's program. Bonnie.
Hey, thank you so much, Christine. I am going to share my screen here. All right. Well, Katie, you're going to be my person to tell me whether that's showing up okay or not. I got a thumbs up from Katie. All right. Well, so hello. I'm Bonnie Johnson, and joining me is Katie Giroux. Now, see, I practiced, Katie, before we started, and here I am immediately messing up. Katie, pronounce your wonderful lyrical last name for us.
Katie Jardu.
Jardu. I love it. Okay. So thank you. We are both part of the Kansas APA Chapter Executive Board and are very pleased to be talking with you today. So you can see it coming. The storm clouds are gathering and heading straight your way. NIMBY's coming, not in my backyard. Here's an overview of our session today. But in particular, I want you to think foundationally about that governance is all about managing. We're in this together. But also, I'm an island and I'm going to live forever. So just a reminder, American political culture was here first, way before the planning profession. So American political culture, individual rights and capitalism, competition and self-reliance, all wrapped up in a democratic bow where we need to work together to make decisions and avoid things like the tragedy of the commons. But no matter how self-sufficient you think you are, you need clean air, water, land, green spaces, and care. we all come into this world as helpless babies and oftentimes go out pretty helpless too. So here's our overview. Foundations, which we just touched on, common Lulus, common NIMBYs, perceptions, and we'll take a trip around the world and say it's not just us in the US. We have some strategies, and then we will wrap things up. So, Katie, what's next?
Alrighty, so be ready. Don't be thrown for a Lulu, or as it's kind of commonly known, locally unwanted land uses. The common types are listed, and they're often related to some sort of human or public service facility associated with the quality of life, or property values, or facilities with potential environmental or health impacts. So things like, drug rehabilitation centers, or a senior center, things like that. They can range from putting in transmission lines to a treehouse next door for the kid and his binoculars that can train on someone's window. We as planners know that many public policies feature spatially concentrated costs and diffuse the benefits for the whole community. I don't want that drug rehab house next door, but I want people to get the help that they need, if only to avoid without living in homes and living on the streets. So local governments have to manage environmental and social services that, though they're deemed necessary and essential, can carry a negative image that creates rejection, worry, or conflict within the community. This is known as the NIMBY effect, which is why you're here today. This reaction is normal. It's related to the social perception of risk and to the complex process of attribution of causes and to real or perceived inequities. It's kind of a self-defense mechanism. Something might alter my quality of life, and I feel risky about that. I'm not sure. So many policies feature spatially concentrated costs and diffuse those benefits, like I stated. So this creates a problem for policymakers. Those spatially concentrated costs can induce local residents to become NIMBYs and to fight the proposed project. Certainly, first and foremost is the calculation of, is this in the public interest? Is this the best spot? If it is, then running down a list of triggers will help with improving the proposal and reducing backlash. Letting people know that these things have been thought through is key, especially about being transparent. There are three primary factors that are wrapped up into NIMBY triggers and that then play into the complexities. So the first one is kind of a level of tolerance or acceptance under rational argument. Y'all know irrational can always come into play, but under a rational argument, what's the tolerance? Can this be tolerated, or how can it be made tolerable? It is possible that you might not hear from these people. They don't tend to turn out to public meetings. But if you can address these things, it can go a long way in easing tensions and some of those conversations that don't end up at the planning meeting, but might end up with commissioners or other people that then have a sway. Two is the level of avoidance or controlled by fear and personal consequences. Can we just avoid having this? It's good to think about. And of course, do we have other choices? Three is the level of compensatory measures. Acceptance or rejection depends on the belief and value system of the affected community. So can we work this out? Or is it just too far away from what we feel the right thing is? In addition to a list of triggers, these are good factors to kind of help put into your analysis and help make things transparent for the public, because these are the things that they're thinking about. Another item to think about is who will turn up in opposition. Research has shown that opponents of proposed facilities are typically a little bit older, they're more highly educated, wealthier, and more likely to organize and attend these meetings. They're very certain of their opposition to the proposed facility. So looking at tolerance, avoidance, and compensatory measures. Helps to kind of anticipate what they might bring up and how they might be feeling.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And so here we're going to talk about the reactions to Lulus can be positive or negative. Related to NIMBY is banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. There's also not. None of that. Nope. Not on planet Earth. Caves. Citizens against virtually everything. And then related to elected officials, there's NAMBY, not against my business or industry, which tend to be favorite political donors. NIMBY, not in my district. NIMBY, not in my election year. And NIM2, not in my term of office. Now, in some cases, you do get a positive response. WIMBY, welcome to my backyard. Or YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. Be aware of these negative and positive connotations. For example, if you think banana, you'll imagine yellow and likely slip up. So lest you miss key elements of context, try to steer clear of such language and engage with the diversity and complexity of local concerns and interests. So, you know, if you think banana and see yellow, you can jump to conclusions. And that can mean that certain concerns don't get thought about or addressed. So be careful about jumping to conclusions. Oh, they're just being selfish, or they are outsiders, or they are not representative of general sentiments. So in contrast to those who see Lulu and NIMBY opposition groups as undermining the democratic system out of self-interest, remember some see these groups as exemplifying democracy, effectively facing challenges despite seemingly little potential for influence. Positive characterizations of Lulu and NIMBY responses point to the inherent value of grassroots citizen opposition. Other positive characterizations of NIMBY responses point to the value of democratic discourse in promoting better decisions about Lulu siting and the value of debate. For example, a case recently here in Douglas County, Kansas, was a large solar farm located on prime farmland and upstream of the North Lawrence neighborhood, which is adjacent to the Kansas River levee. People organized against the project around preserving prime farmland and protecting the neighborhoods near the river from flooding. After much opposition and debate, the solar farm was approved, but wouldn't it be a good idea to perhaps plan for preserving prime farmland in advance and let people know about any updates to the North Lawrence Stormwater Management Plan? Let people know they were heard and their concerns were not forgotten. For planners, use these opportunities to make progress on some things you have probably been wanting to do. For example, Douglas County has wanted to, for years, do a plan that would outline how to and where to preserve prime farmland. Well, now you've got a good group of people who are interested. Prime time for that prime farmland plan. Also, dealing with areas along the riverfront. Again, strike while the iron is hot, and those Douglas County planners can do some great planning around the riverfront. So perhaps create a plan showing prime areas for alternative energy production. Another thing of turning what has been some opposition and heated debate into constructive plans. So get out in front of things like where are good sites for alternative energy production. So based on research of LULUs, be careful not to narrowly focus on the question of location. This automatically presumes the legitimacy of the disputed project as the only and best solution to a problem. So some LULUs, like a prison or a coal-fired power plant, are simply particular solutions to problems. There are alternatives. For example, building an incinerator is one way to deal with the problem of hazardous chemical waste. But another solution would be to require chemical producers to develop new practices that produce less waste. The incinerator solution concentrates costs on the locality, while tighter regulation imposes costs on the industry. So basically, the focus on the question of location, i.e., where should we build it, has the effect of stopping discussion of alternatives. So all of this is pointing out our perceptions, how we think about things, and how we think about those, whether that opens up or closes down alternatives. So we are in a federalist system with local, county, state, and national levels of government. When a policy decision at the national level is made in terms of, say, the social safety net, for example, the impacts are seen at the local level in terms of housing, safety, and health. So if a project comes up and it's sparking a lot of NIMBY and there's a focus on location, stop for a second and think about, is this something that should be a policy dealt with at a different level of government, a higher level? And is it something that we should use our resources to lobby for versus simply thinking about where to locate something? So I took a look at the research and found that this happens around the world. So here's some cases and what happened. And I even ran across an article that said that this was a uniquely American phenomenon, NIMBY. And no, it is not. It is shared around the world. So Australia, in this example, it was construction of an armaments complex. So the study concluded that, contrary to expectations, the distance of respondents' residents to the location of the proposed facility was not associated with opposition or support for the facility. In this case, the opposition was based on ideology, not location. The expression "not in any backyard" or NIMBY has been used in cases where people oppose a sort of development not on grounds of self-interest. So this includes, for example, people who oppose nuclear power in favor of alternative forms of energy. So looking at what exactly is the motivation is key in examples like this. So in Europe, the research from Europe showed that the larger the number of people who share the need for an installation, the lesser the NIMBY effect, which makes a lot of sense. Many of you might be able to think back to the early 1990s when cell phone towers started showing up, and there was a lot of opposition to those. But as they became more and more accepted and more people got cell phones and wanted better coverage, that opposition waned. Another study from Catalonia, where they looked at 47 different cases that involved things like waste, energy, urban pressures, leisure facilities, golf courses, and housing. That research said that all cases involved some sort of environmental concern, risk perception, trends toward rejection increase when projects affect places with a strong symbolic value besides its environmental fragility. So symbolic value and environmental fragility were the things that came together that really increased the opposition. So the results of that study showed that some of the rejection movements are clearly caused by environmental reasons based on sincere arguments of environmental conservation. And those things place some of these closer to those not in any backyard arguments than NIMBY conflicts. But in addition to finding about that strong connection between environmental issues and feelings of loyalty to place, they did find, and this is something to keep your eye on, sometimes there are hidden private interests that have no connection to the environmental arguments being expressed. And so as a result, a certain amount of debunking might need to occur. So keep an eye out for hidden private interests. And that ties back into strategies of just simply being transparent about what's going on. So in the UK, lots of studies about wind farms and how people reacted to those. So one study of wind farms showed that place attachment suggests that how changes to places are interpreted rather than the form of change per se is critical in determining whether the pattern of association between place, attachment, and acceptance is positive or negative. So really looking at how things are being interpreted. So we're getting into perceptions again. This study also suggests that conflicts are particularly likely when restorative places, i.e. those considered to be natural, wild, or places to escape from cities, are when those are impacted by development proposals, they are interpreted to be industrial or technical in nature, and opposition is heightened. So be aware of places where people are thinking, well, I'm trying to get away from it all. And look, industry is finding its way into my peaceful spot. So be aware of how that will heighten opposition. We have an example of this in Kansas. This is particularly true of wind farms in western Kansas. Some people may think all of that wide open space and wind, lots of wind here in Kansas, are prime for wind farms. And they are, but also part of western Kansas are the scenic, beautiful, peaceful Flint Hills. Gentle rolling hills, prairie, limestone, just and sandstone, beautiful part of the state, and thus it doesn't become a prime location for wind farms because of that. Some other studies of wind farms in the UK. Another study analyzes community perceptions toward wind power using a case study to test debates about pre and post acceptance opinions of affected stakeholders. So looking at, we built the wind farm, now what do people think? So this is particularly interesting. So Community members and affected stakeholders were interviewed to assess their perceptions towards the development before and after the wind farm became operational. The results suggest that community perceptions toward the wind farm were influenced by a range of environmental, social, economic, and socio-political variables, but also that community opinion changes considerably over time. Although negative perceptions can still be found pre and post installation, collectively, the community have become used to the turbines and attitudes have generally become more favorable. So the outcomes add to existing before and after wind turbine studies, which show that fears of living near a wind farm at least partly dispel over time. They also find that really the ill will or negative reactions to the wind farms, those that last over time, aren't about actually how the wind farm is operating. It's about the ill will and feelings from the process. People feeling that they weren't heard or trampled on. And so that's the persistent feeling, not a persistent feeling of, oh, the operation of the wind farm is bothering me. So that really points out the importance of the process. And again, being transparent and involving people and trying to look out for those perceptions and triggers and things that we talked about previously. So the Czech Republic, this was about coal mining communities and place attachment. So their findings suggest that both attractors and detractors can persist as a bundle over time and place. First, participants who were born in the places of interest held attachment bundles that were remarkably close in content and description to those of their older relatives. So the people living in these coal mining communities where coal mining is no longer the dominant industry and the community is having economic problems, that even the young people held the same opinions and regrets over the loss of the coal industry as those that actually experienced it. So many of the aesthetics and use of the space were not encountered firsthand, but were transmitted through socialization and kin networks, so that those feelings about dependence on the coal industry and there not being hope of change persisted. So place attachment can really be embedded, being passed down generation to generation. And so there really is going to have to be this concerted effort of discussion about place-based advantages and disadvantages of different industries and where they're moving in the future. So our last example is from France. And this is about a recycling center and a center that creates energy from waste. And this is in Paris. And they started with the principle of how do we deal with waste as close as possible to where it's produced. So they formed a public authority for waste disposal in Greater Paris made up of 85 local governments. And they put together a 40-year operating agreement spelling out health and safety objectives. And they created a committee of local residents called Sentinels in charge of telling plant managers when noise, dust, smell, or other disturbances occurred. So visibly, the waste facility itself is only 2 stories above ground. All the rest of it is underground. And they daylit a sorting center, so sorting of recyclables. It's concealed under a courtyard garden. So this is really showing how that a new waste facility could actually be located within a dense populous area, and it could be constructed and managed to reduce the negative reactions. In general, really the major takeaway from this research and the other research I looked at was that anytime the debate can be turned to us being in this together, there's more of a chance for a successful project. So getting from NIMBY to not impossible, maybe better yet, here are some strategies. The first one, perception of need. So think about the perception of need and distributional equity on the attitudes about where to place things. Research found that the perception of need has as a great an effect as distance on siting preferences. So if that perception of need is very high, that can help balance out that it's nearby. So the authors of this research suggests siting policy should include an understanding of factors leading to the formation of perception of need rather than focusing strictly on things like compensation and risk mitigation as policy instruments. And so in turn, think about community benefit and procedural justice. So to avoid that long-term situation that they see in the UK with wind farms, where the wind farm itself is accepted, but there's ill will over time because of the process. Think about focusing on community benefit and procedural justice. Next, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And I'm going to use an example here again with wind energy. So make it clear to people and transparent that at the beginning, the ordinances that dealt with wind farms were not very good, and they did make mistakes. So for example, in the early days of wind farms, they were allowed to be too close to people's homes. And so that you did get things like the flicker effect, whereas the blades of the turbine are turning, someone's home is perpetually shadow light, shadow light, shadow light, shadow light. Yes, that would be very annoying. But over time, we've learned and the ordinances have changed and the distances have gotten greater to deal with that. So let people know that yes, mistakes were made, and we have honed our ordinances to be better over time. The other one is M&Ms. M&Ms is management and maintenance, and this is going to build trust. So NIMBY reactions might be showing concerns due to improper or arbitrary decision-making and enforcement in the past. So if a past drug rehab center, for example, there have been problems with people hanging about in other people's yards and they haven't been managed well. Well, that's going to create more NIMBY-ism, and you're going to have to be aware of how to manage these things and make sure that that management is consistent and good over time, or you're going to get a backlash. There are things like YIGB, yes, in God's backyard. So churches now are using their excess property for housing. So to get to yes, look for ways of maybe doing outreach and communication that transparency piece. Maybe create some sentinels or advisory boards to make sure that things are getting communicated to those that are managing whatever the project is about noise or disruptive behavior. Concessions or incentives can be helpful as well. And licensing. Other countries really do take advantage of licensing instead of things like special use permits or conditional use permits to, again, monitor the performance of a locally unwanted land use to make sure that you're building that trust and it is being managed properly over time. So to get to yes, look for things like, how can we enhance the social prestige of this? Be transparent. Follow up on management of facilities. If you're looking at compensatory measures, be aware of ones where the compensation looks suspiciously large compared to the risk, because that is going to trigger suspicions by those outside of those getting the compensation. So that's a little thing to be aware of with compensation. So we're going to now get back to Katie talking some more about strategies and how new things can happen.
Thanks, Bonnie. So for anyone to become comfortable with something new or different, it takes time. It takes time for that new idea to diffuse. And kind of like the red curve here you're seeing on the screen with the arrow, it'll kind of start out slow, and then more people will pick it up, and then it can kind of level off again. It'll take time for the new strategies to diffuse. That's kind of the usual learning curve. So some things that research tells us helps new ideas to diffuse in organizations and areas are policy characteristics. So the relative advantage of the new approach is compatibility. It's easy to compare old and new. Complexity, is the new way easier or is it harder? And trialability, is it easy to just give it a try and see? Observability, can we go see it in action? Is there someplace else we can go to see how this is working out? And like Bonnie noted earlier, kind of learn from their mistakes and see how we can change things. Another strategy is internal organization characteristics. So leadership, policy entrepreneurs who knew about the new approaches and can help explain them in a way that everyone can kind of understand who is that knowledge base. Professional organizations and kind of networking. So knowing who knows about the new approach and sharing that information and professionalism. And funding. Who did we give the money to give it a try? Reputation is also an innovator. Do we want to be seen as an innovator? Is this something we want to try? So then people will look to us to kind of help with new ideas and see how it's going. And then the organization size. Sometimes bigger organizations allow for more ideas, and sometimes smaller ones allow for more experimentation. Professionalism, the knowledge base and coordination between staff and elected officials helps to create stability. Some external characteristics are the neighboring jurisdictions, interest groups, public opinion and citizen reactions, professional or regional organizations, and the federal government. Some new ideas here in the United States that are kind of taking off due to this NIMBY response, or that promote not impossible, maybe, and better yet, are in Montana. They passed a series of bills, the governor did, that cities over 550,000 people must adopt at least kind of 5 aspects of the bill. It counters NIMBY-ism and allows for a lot of things outright. So it helps with, yes, in my backyard. If people don't start allowing different things in their communities, so like different housing types, apartments, things like that, then the sprawl is going to continue. which is some of the things that they're trying to counteract there in Montana. This also can tie into educating your neighbors on what they can and cannot change. So if certain things are allowed outright, you can't necessarily change allowing that use there, but what can you change? So if the storage unit is allowed outright, you can instead educate your neighbors on, we can change how it looks. Let's help it blend in with our neighborhood or what's around it a little bit better. It doesn't have to be the design that they've come up with, which maybe doesn't take into the context or history of the neighborhood. So look to educate your neighbors on how they can voice change and get their voices heard. Johnson County, Kansas also did a study on housing. For those outside of Kansas, it's one of the largest counties population-wise in the state. So housing is a big issue here. And one of the goals was to establish and develop a network of housing advocates, because like we mentioned earlier, sometimes those people that don't necessarily oppose the idea, they're not going to voice their opinion. They're okay with things. So this was looking to develop a series of advocates that would come to the meetings and kind of help dispel some of those notions that weren't necessarily true, or kind of turn the banana from orange or green, a green banana, to yellow, so that was what you were thinking when you thought of apartment complexes next to your subdivision, or a drug rehabilitation facility down the street. So they talked about speaking and how you can reframe things to be more meaningful to people. One of the important aspects of that is this apartment complex is going to provide housing for people in your community, like teachers or nurses. So talking about the people that this will affect, it goes much better than speaking simply about duplexes or apartments, and it helps relate the problem to the people in the community, and speaks about who would be living next to them. Planners also need to show more examples and get sketches from developers. I think people forget that we're really visual kind of creatures. So seeing something and how it's going to look can kind of help bridge that gap with neighbors, to show this is what it will actually look like, because what the perception is in their head might not be exactly what is actually going to happen. So again, showing people how to counteract, and because if you don't give them something to look at, they will make up, and it might not be what you're really envisioning. So another good example of kind of community benefit and innovation is the Neighbor Works in Northeast Nebraska. So they work to buy and rehabilitate different sort of dilapidated houses within different areas of Northeast Nebraska. The whole idea is then, instead of investors coming in and kind of taking those properties and then making them unaffordable, they buy them up and then work with a potential owner who would qualify for the house to then put down the 20% for the person. The person does have to put down, I believe, 1%, but they help them put down the 20% that's needed. And then they work with them to rehabilitate the house, to make it more aesthetically pleasing, but also more functional. So maybe it has a bad roof and that's too big of a cost for someone to take on at that price point. So they help to do those kind of things, and they have a fund that helps fund those. So again, it helps rehabilitate a neighborhood and creates potentially sellable properties out of ones that potentially were unsellable, or would be sold to investors, which can change kind of the makeup of the neighborhood. All right.
All right. So as we start to wrap things up, think about the dimensions of community judgment. What is it that people are imagining, thinking? What are they visualizing? And then that can help you think about, well, what do we need to address in our analysis? So how might people view a proposal? What lens are they using? Particularly if it is dealing with land uses and policies that require us to come together to get anything done, we need to think about, well, what is it that's in people's heads? What is it that they're imagining? For myself, just last night, I am on the City of Lawrence Historic Resources Commission. And at that meeting, we had people come in opposition to a proposal for a church to be in a local historic register. If that is approved, then 250 feet around the church property is in a context area. And that means that anything requiring a building permit within that context area would need to be reviewed administratively by the historic preservation officer or possibly by the Historic Resources Commission. There were several people there last night that were very much in opposition to being in the context area because they thought that it would give the church control over what happens on their property and would make any development on their property more expensive. Informationally, those property owners needed to know that the process for doing anything in a context zone is actually very easy and quick. And there were even examples there at the meeting that night of administratively approved sign permits, additions to buildings that all were done within a 30-day time period and were not expensive and did not stop development. So it was good at the meeting to point out that here are examples right now of how being in a context zone did not prevent these other businesses from making improvements, and it didn't delay their projects. So that transparency, that being able to tell those things. And hopefully it was actually more powerful for that message to come from me being on the Historic Resources Commission versus coming from staff. So hopefully that helped dispel some fears. And if you can ever get your board members to take that upon themselves to help show that in this instance, the Historic Resources Commission, we're not bad guys and we're not so scary. So hopefully that helped in that situation. So try to put yourself in the minds of other people to then figure out what you need to talk about and what fears maybe need to be dispelled, or what fears really are important and we should be paying attention to. So for example, think about in terms of demographics. So age, gender, race, ethnicity, social class, how are these perhaps affecting the equation of whether something is a good idea or a bad idea? Another thing in terms of disability, type of disability, physical, mental, social, how are those things playing into people's images of what's going on? And then think about the severity of the disability. Is it something that's contagious? We've had to deal with that lately, haven't we? Life-threatening? Is it something that's chronic? Is it something that's mild? And the visibility of the disability. Is it invisible or predominant? And then also, how are people thinking about culpability? Is the recipient of services blameless or blameworthy? Are people thinking of, well, these people are not worthy of services, or worthy of us taking the time and attention to address what's going on. So thinking about all of that psychology that's going into how people are reacting. And that's where I think that the 3 essential questions can be put into your analysis, so into your staff reports. Who is helped by the proposal? Who is harmed? And who is missing? And so if you think about those 3 essential questions, that can start the discussion of what is it that we're needing to come together as a community to address. And as you're going through those, who is helped, who is harmed, who is missing, think about demographics, disability, culpability, that will help you answer those questions as you're analyzing a proposal and putting all of these, making all these thought processes transparent. In general, as planners, we know that we are in a perpetual balancing act of rights of the community and rights of the individual. Hopefully, what we've talked about here can help you make that balancing act more transparent for people, and that you can address what needs to be addressed in your analysis so that the elected officials can make a good decision. One thing that I have found that is interesting and that research has proven is that looking to the future and imagining ourselves there is extremely difficult. I think that's something that planners have known and faced for a long time, but brain scans actually show that it is very difficult. Brain scans show that when we think about a stranger, certain parts of our brain light up. Then when we think about ourselves in the future, the same places light up in our brains. So our future selves are strangers to us. And that makes it difficult for us to befriend them and to think about what this means for the future. So being able to think about perception, connotations, and add these things to your analysis, I think will help us be able to look out for that stranger in the future that's actually us. So the 3 essential questions here are helpful for analyzing Lulus and what might be going on with NIMBY phenomena. These can slow down our thinking and our tendency to jump to conclusions or make assumptions. So I think we're going to stop there and see what questions there are about how to get from NIMBY to it's not impossible, maybe, oh, better yet. So Christine, what have we got?
So folks, again, if you have questions, just type them in that chat box. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to get into it. The first question is, residential segregation is deeply embedded in the American experience and contributes to NIMBY-ism. So are there strategies to combat this without further dividing the community, particularly when we're talking about, I mean, everyone's talking about affordable housing right now. And I know housing is it's a hot button issue just across the board, but also with communities, I feel like forever, housing in all varieties, whatever it is, seems to be a hot button item, whether it be rental, multi-family, affordable. How do we tackle this beast, particularly from the light of the fact that there's a lot going on with housing reform right now across the US.
Yeah, I don't know. Katie, you looked at that recent housing information. Do you want to jump in here and then I'll jump in?
Sure. So I think Montana gave one approach with this sort of omnibus bill that they are allowing different things by right, but then there is some um, role that the local government plays in that they can kind of pick from those things. I know in Kansas, I don't know that that would ever work because local control is so deeply important to people. But Frameworks Institute has a really great article on housing and sort of that really embedded how, well, we think wealthy people want to live with only other wealthy people and things like that. And they have great recommendations on how to kind of approach that with like, don't contest people's public assumptions about how they're choosing their housing. Instead work to tell a story of how it's an us rather than them approach, and how we together are going to do this. It kind of helps with connecting housing and other issues, as well, to kind of help people focus on things more as a whole instead of one specific issue. So I can pass that along. I can put it in the chat, the link to the article, and you guys can go from there. But it's a really great article that kind of points a lot of those things out.
Well, and this is where I think that within a meeting setting, a workshop, that using those 3 essential questions can help people start to come to terms with, oh, wait, who is missing from my neighborhood? Oh, it's like this. I mean, I really do think that questions like that are very powerful. They get at our values and they surface them. And that is sometimes the hardest part. I mean, we talk about the importance in planning of having deliberative processes and dialogue, and that is all predicated on that people will discuss and that people will come to a meeting from a civil place and an open-minded place. So I think that's where you have to use techniques like the 3 essential questions to start uncovering things that aren't occurring to people, that something some people are being left out. Also, I think a big component of the fear of, oh, I might have a neighbor with a different income than mine, is that that people really are concerned about, well, there's my property values, and this is my investment, is my house. And if I have someone next door that is doing something that will harm that, then I'm risking my nest egg. And that's really where things like code enforcement come into play, and actually doing code enforcement, actually enforcing some noise ordinances, and then having a local safety net for when people can't do the repairs to their homes that are needed. So code enforcement and safety nets for home repairs, maintenance, I think go hand in hand and can help with moving the needle on that. It's that management and maintenance piece that often gets neglected. there's also the temperature taking technique, where you're starting off a public meeting or dialogue with, you start off with what are your hopes and wishes? What is new information that you have that nobody else has? Makes people feel like the experts that they are, and you might find out things that you don't know. And then you can get into, well, what is a complaint you have and a solution? So you can't just complain without a solution. And that helps people realize, oh, it's really hard to solve these things. And then you get into well, so what are your concerns? And then you come back around at the end to hopes and wishes for the future. So you're leaving the meeting with good feelings, but you've been able to, through a public dialogue and seeing what other people are saying, to work through issues in a systematic way. So there's techniques like that, and it's the value of of group reflective practice. So as a group, being able to reflect on, well, what's going on? What are our thoughts? And actually being able to discuss.
Bonnie, I think that group reflective practice is so important, because I think people can't imagine something that's not already actively kind of happening to them. So like, I don't have a disability. I don't know what that's like. So I don't know the challenges. Well, if I broke my foot and was in a wheelchair tomorrow, I can't get to the store. I can't get in my car. So I do have a Walmart, but the path is not smooth enough for me to get there. So you have to envision some of those issues that might come up that are that you can't see, right now, because it's not necessarily happening to you. So that envisioning, I think, is really important as well.
An overarching question, and Bonnie, you started to bring it up with, oh, my property value. I'm worried about my property value. I feel like that two of the major concerns, I don't know, maybe it's an Ohio thing, is one, is this going to affect my property value? And then a subset of that is my basement going to flood because of this? Because you're taking trees down and you're putting up a development, and I've already flooded twice in the last 10 years. So those are, I feel like, at least in Ohio, that's the big issue here. So we know, and when I do trainings with planners in Ohio, and we talk about ways to really like connect with your legislators and make it count for them, at the end of the day, it always comes down to money. Always. It's how can we not rope them in? How can we help them understand through the lens of what they're most concerned about, which is money and the value of whatever it is that's important to them? Can you respond to that? And even if you have some examples or ways in which we can speak money to folks, knowing that it's probably one of, if not the most important thing that scares them.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, I mean, we are in the middle of a bit of a shift of where people are getting to the point to where being a renter isn't the end of the world, and that there are benefits to renting, and as that shift occurs, there will be a little bit less of the all of my nest egg is in my house, and thus I'm desperate to protect it. So there's kind of a shift in thinking there, and that there's other things to invest in. And I know that people won't like this, but just as some investments may go down in value, some investments in property and your house may also go down in value, like if you invested in the stock market. There is a level of risk. Um, but I think that the approach that that Strong Towns takes of breaking down what costs what is very powerful. Being able to show how much tax dollars it would take to do to keep up with what it is that we're wanting to keep up with is very valuable. So Strong Towns is helping with that. I also think that being able to shift the discussion about investments is part of this as well. But then that maintenance and management piece, I cannot stress enough of how things like code enforcement and maintenance safety net should be part of a very important part of local policies, so that you don't get into the position of I'm thinking that I'm protecting my investment by making sure everybody in my neighborhood is the same income. That's not the way. Also, if you are allowing for smaller lots, then there isn't as much upkeep. And so it is cheaper for those with lesser incomes to be able to have a single family home and it not be as expensive.
I want to dive in a little bit deeper to the topic of maintenance. What if you're a community that just doesn't have the budget for code enforcement? You have one code enforcement officer, that's it. And they've got way bigger fish to fry than grass growing or noise on a Saturday night. And so let's just say, that's a scenario, or a scenario of the community admits that they haven't done a great job at code enforcement, at the maintenance piece, at maybe it's in there, maybe it's baked in their code and they just haven't done a good job. Or let's just say they do a great job, but the community just doesn't know. So how do we look at those? Like, what do we do to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in I've lived in Nashville in some low income neighborhoods there, and we did take it on as a community to help one another out. It was an area that, I mean, to be quite frank, the rest of the city did not care about. So we created our own, well, I wouldn't say we, the community created its own, essentially like, not police force, but community force that created its own daycare. Because nobody else they couldn't afford to go anywhere else, but people needed to work. They created their own, going around and mowing people's lawns where they needed it, making sure that people were getting to health appointments, and purchased a community van to start taking people to not only polling locations, but to doctor's appointments and to schools. Nashville continues to bus students around to different schools outside of where they live. And then they also started a sort of community watch program where they went around at night, making sure that things were going okay. If there were crowds in a location, disseminating the crowd, taking things down. So it really became a community approach. It's called Gideon's Army, and it's pretty incredible what they've done in the area that I used to live in. So that one took a community approach. I think it's also working with your community leaders to understand, like, do we not have the budget for code enforcement, or what's going on, kind of recognizing that there is a problem, and then how they would want to fix it. Let's talk together about how we can find a solution, because that creates a lot of, I mean, it's really frustrating if your neighbor isn't gonna, mow his lawn and it gets to be 5 feet high. Well, let's understand why he isn't able to do that. I mean, did he just go through a divorce and has 2 kids and working, and so he doesn't have time? Like, okay, well, I have time, I can do that. So I think it's also helping the community understand who exactly is responsible for taking action and resolving outcomes, but then also that, again, it's us. It's not just them. It's creating a community of us that we can all help one another.
Well, and I would add that there are things neighborhood wise that I mean the city can be a catalyst for neighborhood organizations, not neighborhood associations, neighborhood organizations, not homeowners associations, neighborhood organizations, where you do things like once a year is the neighborhood cleanup, and the city provides dumpsters, and everybody knows this is the weekend that you're going to do cleanup. Um, Maybe the day before is the neighborhood garage sale, and then the day after is the neighborhood cleanup where everything goes into the dumpsters. And there's also things like if your community has a technical school, getting students that are learning carpentry, roofing, maintenance, that during those certain times, they are the strike force going into the neighborhood and helping doing minor repairs. So being able to organize that on a neighborhood by neighborhood schedule, to where every neighborhood is getting touched each year with a cleanup maintenance day. So that's one way. Christine, you also mentioned flooding and stormwater. That is a huge NIMBY trigger just about anywhere, except for places that don't have any water. And then they're like, we'd love to have that. That's where, I mean, there was a bit of discussion after last year's hurricane season about changing FEMA and flood control. If we really can get to the don't build in the floodplain. No, none of this, well, I will raise my home above the floodplain and I can build and send the water off to somebody else. And to think that we can engineer our way out of that, that will go a long way towards dealing with flooding if we can just stop building in the floodplain. I know that's pie in the sky, everybody, but we almost were there last year with some discussions of flood insurance. So hopefully that is maybe going to make some traction there. That's also in thinking in terms of watersheds is another way of showing we're in this together, because what I do to my home to flood-proof it may possibly be just putting the water someplace else on somebody else. So thinking in terms of watersheds is another way of triggering, we impact each other.
Let's pivot a bit and talk about public participation. I mean, we could spend weeks on this. It's like, oh, people make their whole careers out of this in the planning world, right? And also just a plug, we have so many wonderful sessions through the webcast series on our YouTube channel regarding citizen participation, everything from just how to do it to the equity piece of it, new technology and methods, all the things. So there's that. Now, this is an interesting question. And I could say this is true, that we can say that a lot of local public meetings tend to attract the naysayers and not so much the supporters, which I think that's sort of just human nature. Is there a more collaborative process that we can look at that would kind of even out the playing field, and help everyone kind of see everyone else's perspective? If you're only getting one perspective over and over again, whether you are the person standing up as the naysayer, or, you're a council person or a mayor or whoever is on the other side, and all they're hearing is one specific viewpoint and then acting based on that. So thoughts on alternatives to make things more collaborative so that, as you say, Bonnie, you know, everyone kind of understands that we're in this together and that it's like a whole approach.
I mean, I think that's where some of the Johnson County, what they're doing is creating advocates to go to these meetings and speak positively about things. They've tried to create a fact book so that these people are not just, oh, I like it, okay, thanks, but like come with some facts about why they like it and why it is good for the area, in different scenarios. So I think that's one way, is creating kind of this advocacy group for places, because yeah, you want more people who are for something to come. That's one approach. I don't know, Bonnie, did you have others?
I do think that finding your people. There's also the theory of planning. Yes, I'm a professor, but but I was a practitioner for 8 years, so I know both sides. But a theory of planning that's collaborative planning, where you're working together. But again, that is assuming people want to work together. But that's where planners, your planning commission, your advisory boards, if you don't have a constructive advisory board, like your planning commission might not be the friendliest towards planning, that happens. You might need to create another advisory board. Speaking of Johnson County, Kansas, they have a group of citizens called Vigor, a very interested group of residents. And it's having those connections out in the community that you can draw on, that when you need a constructive person to show up at a meeting, you know who to contact and for them to come. And that's all about relationships, knowing people, knowing your community. Again, if you don't have a constructive board, find one and create one. One of the books that I have my students read that has a hopeful planning story to it is called Free. What is it? It's by Mia Burke, and it's her memoir about being the second pedestrian bicycle planner in Portland, Oregon. And it's called Joyride. And when she started, Portland was not the bicycle mecca of the world. And she had to create this group of people through her example. She would show up to meetings having ridden her bicycle to the meetings, and finding her allies within City Hall, within Public Works, and slowly building this culture of the city organization and the city that was supportive of bicycle infrastructure. And so students often hear the horror stories of planning and how hard it is. And so I love to give them that book to read, because it is about successfully navigating people who hate the idea and don't want to have the bike lane on their street, and that getting turned on its head over time. So Joyride, I recommend. It's a how to turn a community around that actually Portland was not on board at the beginning.
This next question, I read it and I went, yes, yes, yes. I have totally experienced this and been just totally blindsided and not prepared during meeting. So I'm just going to kind of read this for the most part, okay, word for word. Could you discuss some strategies to address virtue opposition. So opponents with an agenda, racism, classism, fear of change, whatever, pulling other issues in without appropriate context to oppose a project to try to elicit additional opponents, but kind of without any kind of founding data behind it. So, for example, a new bike lane will result in tree removal, and our urban canopy is gone, heat island effect, all the things, or a small affordable housing project in an urban area, everyone's going to flood. That's it. It's over. We're done for. And, you know, I think maybe some communities know who those people are and they can expect it and may have established, hopefully, strategies to combat that. But how do you prepare for those types of people, and how do you respectfully properly educate people on the topics?
Katie, do you want to go or?
Sure. So I've had those people at meetings, and I tend to say to explain the city's process for, stormwater retention, whether that's a detention pond underground or whatever. And, if you do have problems after this is built, here's who you need to contact, and let's walk through this. I think that's also where visuals can kind of help. If they're more persistent in things, I have had to tell people, like, I appreciate your concerns and we can talk, after this, but I want to make sure I'm here to make sure everyone's opinion gets heard. So we're going to need to table this for right now. I feel like we've discussed it, but then let's talk about this over here while we make sure everyone gets heard. So I've had to tell people to stop. But I think a lot of it is educating people, and some of it comes down to, like, if they want to listen or not. You can tell, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. If they don't want to hear what you have to say, then nothing you say is going to appease them. But I think a lot of it is also just explaining, this is our process for that. It sounds like that's not happening on your property. So let's talk about that. We need to do it, in a different meeting where I can invite the public works director or whatever. But understanding that something has happened that's made them shift, and let's talk about that, but this isn't maybe the right forum for that right now.
In your experience and research, both of you, have you found an effective way to communicate that type of information, like the facts, the processes, knowing, again, that not everyone's going to come to a public meeting, but, they'll talk at the fence. So have you found effective ways to communicate to the general public about the processes?
Yeah. So my main area of research is actually staff reports. And staff reports really are the main consistent way planners have of speaking to the public, advisory boards, and elected officials. I think staff reports are long and boring and are underutilized as a exciting, intellectually creative, intellectually sparking way of getting people to think about what it means to do things together. And so I think a staff report should anticipate the things we've talked about in this session, address them, use the research about how a trail behind your house does not increase crime. Go ahead and include that up front in the staff report before it ever comes up. I mean, anticipate these things. Anticipate what's going to hijack a message. Put that into your staff report. Start educating a little bit at a time. Every month, you're going to have a staff report. And you could even have a little bit of your staff report that is, did you know? Did you know? Research says, blah, 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 blah. Use it as a tool to educate and bring people along. And then eventually, hopefully, you will have someone on the planning commission going, oh, well, research says this. Or we've done some case studies in our community, and this has happened. How about a controversial case that got approved, and then you do a before and after analysis, kind of like that UK study, pre and post wind farm, how people feel, how it's doing. If you've had a controversial case, do some post research to figure out how is this doing? What are the neighbors saying after it's actually happened? Then you can use that for future decisions. You can also include that in your staff reports of this happened in 1981. We have tracked it over time and the property values have not gone down. And it's a case from your own community. So use all of that great information you have to educate people, and use that staff report. Use things like your city's YouTube channel. Do a little video about property values and this and that, and here's what we've learned, and educate people. And then when someone shows up at the meeting, everybody already has some information, some talking points to be able to have an informed discussion.
I think also asking the person, so asking the tax appraiser, the county tax appraiser, hey, do you think this will impact values? I mean, I've worked someplace that we did that, and he came to meetings if we thought it was going to be really controversial. It's not a be all end all, but it's, he's giving information, and that authority giving that is a little bit more that goes across better than me giving it as a planner. Asking the police chief or somebody in the police department, hey, can you look at this trail? Is, our lights going to be good to help deter crime? Or is there a lot of crime in this area? Can you speak to that? And we can put it in the staff report. It also helps show later, years down the road, if people are upset about it. Oh, well, we did ask him. We did try. And that's what was happening at the time. That doesn't mean we can't revisit it, but we did ask the chief of police and the county tax appraiser to discuss these things. So I think that also ups your credibility as a planner to kind of ask the best person for the job.
So what I'm hearing here is that Bonnie and Katie are coming back to do a session on staff reports. I think that's what I'm hearing. Because I think that's the next logical step here, is that we break down the staff report. Yep, I'm getting the thumbs up from people. I guess, how's November look?
I love to talk about staff reports.
Good, because you're coming back. Okay, we got to wrap up. And there were so many questions still. Like, y'all, there were almost 1,000 people registered for this webinar. We had over 500 on it at one point. We are recording the session. It will be posted up onto our YouTube channel, youtube.com/planning webcast, and that'll be up on Monday. Don't forget to register for all of our upcoming sessions at ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Log those CM credits. And Katie and Bonnie, thank you for joining, and for APA Kansas for hosting this session. We appreciate you, and we'll see you back here towards the end of the year on staff reports.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. We'll talk next time.